Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Happy Friday. We are a day away from Georgia and Auburn. I cannot wait for it. So excited, and we're going to do our part to get you excited for today as well. Big preview of the Dogs and the Tigers, including, I think, the one matchup that Georgia has got to exploit to win this game on Saturday. We'll talk about that. A little bit on the quarterbacks, a little more on the interesting back and forth between Gus Malzahn and Kirby Smart this week. And before we're done, Terrence Edwards, when he was on the show yesterday, told a great story that set up John Stinchcomb, his former Georgia teammate, to tell another great story. So yesterday we got some of that on the DawgNation video channels. I want to give you a brief taste of this a little bit later on. So let's do that then. And good to have you with us now. It's Jeff Sintel coming up later on. Y'all, these are the moments we live for. Georgia-Auburn, Deep South's oldest rivalry. I love it. I'm glad to have you with us for it. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. A little late, but still ready to rock and roll. Presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So apart from my job, talking about Georgia football for a living and hopefully keeping all of you entertained, in addition to that, Georgia football is also like my favorite pastime as well. It's kind of a weird life that I live where my professional life and my personal social life, kind of intersect the way that they do. But I spend a lot of time thinking about Georgia football beyond just the notion of, hey, what am I going to talk about and how we're going to present content and all that kind of stuff. And I guess admittedly, I'm probably, for those of us who are children of the 80s, maybe we do have a little Larry Munson in us. Vince Dooley was this way too. Maybe we do have a tendency to kind of, talk up the opponent in our minds a little bit. I don't necessarily mean to do that. It's just kind of probably the way that I am. I do think that Auburn is a good team, and I do think this is a really challenging game for Georgia, and I want to apologize for that. I've actually spent most of this offseason, I think, saying that I think that Auburn is better than some of you do, and I think for the most part, I'm going to stick with my opinion on that. However, as we get closer to the start of the game on Saturday night, home opener between the hedges, Georgia and Auburn doesn't get any bigger than that. As we get a little closer to it, I do find myself, and I'm sort of speaking more as a fan here as opposed to someone who's kind of a professional blowhard yelling into a microphone for a living. I'm sort of more confident about the game than I probably was on Monday. Certain portions of the day on Saturday against Arkansas did not fill me with very much confidence at all. But I'm kind of growing in my belief that Georgia can win this game on Saturday. For my official pick, I've taken Georgia minus the points. Georgia was a 7-point favorite a little earlier this week. I took Georgia minus the 7 right there to not just win, but to also cover. And I think I'm really zeroing in on one aspect of this game where I think that Georgia has a decided advantage. And in terms of whether or not Georgia wins and how easy it is, it's how much Georgia is able to exploit this particular advantage. That's ultimately what's going to determine how this game unfolds on Saturday. And what's funny is it seems like my opinion and the evolution of that opinion over the course of the last couple of days is very similar to former Georgia great David Pollack. David has really been providing really good analysis of Georgia on that ESPN CFB podcast that he's a part of. Kevin Agani's on there. Sometimes Kirk Herbstreit's on there too. It's like a hodgepodge cast of characters. But Pollack is really good on that and talking about Georgia. And Pollack said on the show this week that, after seeing Auburn beat Kentucky and seeing some of the ways in which Georgia played against Arkansas, he was of the belief that Auburn was probably going to beat Georgia. And, when you watch TV tomorrow, if you're watching ESPN Game Day from Athens, you'll probably hear some folks on that stage call for Auburn to pull that upset. Corso may put on the Auburn headgear. For the most part, Georgia fans don't really care about that. But, all of this may happen. However, Pollack on his own podcast has also kind of gone into some evolution about why it is he now thinks Georgia has a much better chance of winning this game than maybe initially did. And he looks at one matchup in particular as a decided matchup in favor of UGA, a big advantage. Let you hear David Pollack from the ESPN podcast this week, and that will set us up.
Auburn's offensive line is going to be an issue throughout this season. I think Georgia's defense is really good. And when I say that, Kevin, none of these guys play snap. You look across the country, you got an average of guys playing 50, 60 snaps a game easily. Georgia has 12 to 15 guys that play 30-something snaps a game. They just rotate. And by the way, there's not a drop-off. Up front on the defensive line, you can go Herring and Watts, and you can keep going down the list of Jordan Davis, the new guys. You got 6, 7, 8 guys you can play on your defensive line. Outside linebacker, you've got plenty of guys you can roll in and roll out. It's a huge luxury. So as I've watched, I think Georgia's defense gives them a really good chance, especially against an Auburn offensive line that I don't think is great, and I think it's going to take a lot of time to get better.
So that's what it comes down to for me as well. I think David Pollack says that very, very well. You look at one of the places where Auburn is probably weakest. I would say offensive line is that spot. They're working in new starters, still trying to figure some things out. They did not run the ball particularly well against Kentucky a week ago, who really typically is pretty good on its lines of scrimmage on both sides under Mark Stoops. The Auburn offensive line probably left something to be desired. And as Pollack says, when you think about all of the capable defensive linemen that Georgia can and will play, all of the capable outside linebackers that Georgia can and will play, that ought to be a huge advantage for Georgia. And determining how easy Georgia wins this game on Saturday, it becomes really a storyline of how much can Georgia exploit that there with its front seven. As far as the outside linebackers go, Kirby Smart did spend some time talking about that group this week. And in particular, one of the things that Smart brought up was one of the same things that David Pollack brought up there, that Georgia, it's not just the talent level of the group, it's the multitudes of outside linebackers that Georgia can play. In fact, in particular, listen to how one of the top guys in this Georgia roster has kind of responded to the situation where he's kind of forced to kind of rotate in with a bunch of different guys. This is how deep Georgia potentially is at its outside linebacker spot. Here's Kirby Smart adding some color to what David Pollack just brought to mind.
Yeah, they all have roles. They all have different strengths, and they feed off of each other. They're a fun group to coach. I think Coach Lang does a great job. They're very prideful in their performance, and that's the way it should be within your unit. We try to find more ways to use them in our defense and be creative about creating roles for them that cause problems for the offense. So I'm very pleased with those guys. Nolan is He's fun to coach. He's full of spirit. He's never had a bad day, and he's fired up out there on the practice field. And he's one of those guys you just like to coach. I mean, he texted me the other night, said, "Can I go to the scout team? I'm not getting enough reps. I'm having to rotate among 3 guys. I want more reps. Can I go get reps on the scout?" That's just the kind of kid he is.
So think about this for a moment, and it's a cool story for Nolan Smith, but it also really speaks to the situation for Georgia there as well. Nolan Smith says, "Hey, I'm rotating around right now with Azeez Ojulari and Jermaine Johnson and all the very good Georgia outside linebackers, Adam Anderson. Let me go to scout team for a little bit because I want to get some more reps during practice." And maybe the subtext to that is Nolan Smith says, "Hey, I want to show you what it is that I'm capable of doing." And I just think that does speak to the depth that Georgia has that position. But just playing a bunch of people who are capable of playing well is in and of itself not enough. Georgia also needs that really big performance from these guys on Saturday, whether it's Ojulari, who kind of spoke this week about the fact that he wasn't a preseason All-SEC guy, and Nolan Smith, who says he wants extra practice reps, and what's going on there with Jermaine Johnson and Adam Anderson. That group has got to get after the quarterback on Saturday. Georgia had 2 sacks against Auburn a year ago, and certainly the last one by Trayvon Walker sealed the deal for the Georgia win. I think UGA needs at least that many this upcoming Saturday, if not more, to really, offer its best chance at victory. You have got to put Bo Nix in the dirt if you want to win this game, because of the fact that we do know that Nix can throw the ball. I think he's better now than he was, and he does have a pretty talented crop of wide receivers to throw to. So Georgia using its outside linebackers and all the different guys that it plays there to get around that Auburn offensive line, get after that quarterback, in a day in which we expect the Georgia offense to still struggle a little bit. What Georgia does in that situation, I think, is important for this game. But when you think front seven here against the Auburn offensive line, you're not just thinking pass rush. This is also a situation where Georgia's got to step up and remain stout with the rush defense, much the same way it was all throughout last year. Let me just quick brief aside here. I think one of the things that gets kind of overlooked a little bit is just how much Georgia's rush defense in 2019 had been an improvement over where that group had played in 2018. Now, the development of Jordan Davis, I think, is a big part of that. But when you think about a very good Georgia team in 2018, not perfect across the board, and one of the areas in which Georgia probably could have been a little bit better going back 2 years ago to 2018 was this was not a great team against the run, but it was massively improved in that situation a year ago. And when you face Auburn this week, knowing the Tigers did not get many rushing yards against Kentucky, finding a way to make sure that trend continues this week, I think is also pivotal for UGA. And by the way, this week, Gus Malzahn, in the midst of kind of praising the Georgia situation, was asked specifically about Georgia against the run. knowing that's an area in which Auburn's trying to get going here this week. And Malzahn pointed out, last season that was one of the toughest things about facing the Bulldogs. Here is Gus on the Georgia rush defense.
Of course, last year we played them late in the season. I don't think they'd given up a rushing touchdown the whole year. And, we had one on a quarterback run, and they got just about everybody back. So, you're looking at not just, one of the best rushing defense, if not the best rushing defense in the country, but one of the best overall defenses. And, after last year, I felt like that they were the best defense we played all year after playing them, and they got the majority of the guys back. They make you earn it, and that's the key. They make you earn it. They mix things up. They check when you check, and they're a very sound unit.
I've said this over and over again. When you think about Georgia losing a game, in this case another game in which it's favored, the recipe for upsetting Georgia always involves that opposing offense getting some yards in the ground. If you're not getting rushing yards against Georgia, you really have very little chance of winning that game. And obviously that's one of the things that Malzahn through his career has been known for doing, is finding a way to get that rushing attack going. They were not great rushing the ball a year ago, and were not great week one against Kentucky. And so you zero in on this matchup. What happens with the Georgia front seven, with its defensive line, with its outside linebackers, finding a way to get to the quarterback, finding a way to stymie the Auburn rushing attack. If you're looking for the reason why Georgia wins, I think you zero in on that. That battle with the Auburn offensive line is maybe the biggest part of this. And if you're looking for a way in which Georgia can make this a little bit more comfortable and maybe not in a sweat job until the final play, it's how much you exploit that advantage that probably matters. There's a lot for Georgia that's still very much unsettled, and a lot of that's on the offensive side of the ball. Quarterback, which we'll get to, Georgia's own rushing attack, which we've talked about a lot here this week. But one of the areas in which Georgia is stout, is ready, and is as advertised is right there with the front of that defense. And what that group can do to the Auburn offensive line will go a long way in determining the outcome of this game coming up on Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Also streaming video, radio. It's good to be back on the radio today on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref after a couple of days of being preempted for Braves baseball. And good job by the Braves of beating the Cincinnati Reds and getting ready to move on now to the NLDS. And, of course, good job for all of you for being here with us today. And a huge thanks for Kroger for making it all possible. Kroger just really takes good care of you. We love our friends at Kroger, and we're so thankful to have them with us here on the program today. And, by the way, speaking of those Atlanta Braves, don't forget, Kroger is a big sponsor of the Atlanta Braves as we head towards the postseason, head towards the NLDS. So get stocked up there at Kroger for all you need when it comes to that. The mix-it-up celebration that's been going on. Kroger's helping Braves fans mix it up for the postseason as we head towards that there. So Kroger.com, you can get all stocked up for your game watching parties and everything else you need right there at Kroger. It's one of my favorite things about the fall time of year. It's Braves playoff baseball. Kroger's a proud sponsor of that. So check it out online, Kroger.com, for a whole lot more on that. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sintel coming up in a moment. We're going to go on the road with him, assisted today by AAA. Before we do that, let's spend some time talking about Georgia on the other side of the ball, heading towards Saturday. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And so I think as we head towards Saturday, I am of the belief that here's the thing I'm the most certain about. The thing I'm the most certain about is more than one quarterback for Georgia will play as a part of the game plan design. I could end up being wrong about that, but if you ask me to rank my level of certainty, that's the thing I'll rank first, is that Georgia plans on playing multiple quarterbacks on Saturday. Sort of second on that list for me would be that Stetson Bennett probably takes the first snap under center on Saturday. That's the second most likely prediction that I'm willing to make as it heads towards Saturday. The third thing I'm willing to say about the Georgia quarterback situation is that I do believe in some form or some fashion Dwan Mathis still plays. How much does he play? I don't know. Is it more in a role as someone who kind of comes in for kind of some of the gadget stuff, things like that? It could possibly be that. But the notion that Kirby saw enough from Mathis in the first half last week to say they don't want to play him anymore this upcoming week against Auburn, somehow I feel like Kirby probably has a little longer leash than that and probably a little longer or wider threshold of patience for that. Kirby talked this week, I think these words are important to remember, that these evaluations for us, we put a huge emphasis on what we see in the games. But for Georgia coaches who've been watching practice after practice after practice after practice, The game itself is only one data point in a larger piece of analysis, and Mathis probably wouldn't have been in the role he was last Saturday had he not done some things in practice, kind of earned that opportunity. So I would caution Georgia fans not to be too quick to give up on D'Wan Mathis. I would caution Georgia fans and encourage Georgia fans to stay in Mathis's corner. I believe in some form or fashion Mathis will be a part of the game plan on Saturday against Auburn, and I believe that's probably a good thing. Now, the final piece of this, and admittedly the thing I know the least about and feel the least confident speaking about whatsoever, is how healthy JT Daniels is and how much Daniels is truly going to play. Smart has told us that he's cleared and ready to go, but what does that really mean, and how much does the lost practice time for Daniels, assuming there has been some, how much does that slow him down in terms of being ready for this upcoming week? That, to me, remains the most mysterious part of this. Because he's got so much experience, if Daniels is truly fully healthy, I think he's the biggest part of the Georgia quarterback picture, and I believe he will be, with all due respect to Stetson Bennett, who did play well a week ago. I do believe that Daniels is the eventual starter. But is that ready to start beginning right now? Is he healthy enough to do that? I'll have to see that with my own eyes to know that for sure. It's around the doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. Marco's Pizza is America's most beloved pizza. It's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. And if you're getting ready for some great game day stuff here this weekend, one of the things we love about Marco's, it's good food at a great price. And let me give you a perfect example of that. Watching football this weekend, large one-topping pizza, 10 chicken wings, or dippers, it's just $17.99. That is truly a DawgNation game day favorite. You can order today by going to the Marco's app, which is very convenient, or finding them online at marcos.com. Website, once again, marcos.com. That'll get you in touch with our friends at Marco's Pizza. All right, good to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. I want to talk more about Georgia Auburn. I want to get into the recruiting battle that these programs have waged in the past and maybe waging right now. Good person to do that with is our buddy Jeff Sintel. Let's go on the road with him right now, assisted by AAA.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We're getting ready to talk to Jeff Sintel here, and obviously the topic that we discuss when Jeff joins us is always related to the world of recruiting. And over the course of my lifetime, I don't know that Georgia has had a bigger recruiting rival than Auburn. Now, that has seemingly been less true in recent years, mostly because Kirby's just kind of blown Malzahn off the map when it comes to the major recruiting battles, although Auburn has won a couple that maybe Georgia would have liked to have won in recent years. But it sets the stage for the game that's coming up on Saturday night. So, Jeff Sintel, welcome to the program for you, and thanks for talking about that with us here on the road, assisted by AAA.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, good morning, everybody. Big game weekend. It feels weird having this thing in October, even though it was supposed to be in October. But I think the storyline you're referencing is valid. Remember last year it was Tank Bigsby, Georgia, Auburn, Broderick Jones. Auburn was making a late push for Broderick Jones. He might even have been starting for Auburn this weekend if he was at Auburn right now. It's just the same dance every year.
Yeah, it is, and that's why I found it so interesting this week when Gus Malzahn mentioned the notion that he thought that Georgia was the most talented team in the SEC. Kirby Smart kind of pushed back on that. I find all of this to be fascinating, both in terms of the fact that Malzahn and Kirby probably have a little bit of a healthy, maybe rivalry with each other. I'll be kind and kind of describe it that way. But also from the standpoint that it almost seemed like Kirby didn't like the notion that he was being described as the most talented team. But Jeff, when I look at the main reason why I think that Georgia wins on Saturday, it is for the very reason that Malzahn brought up, that Kirby has been winning the recruiting battles that maybe in years past Auburn would have won more of its share of. And so on a day in which I still expect the Georgia offense to struggle, I also start to feel a little bit more confident that Georgia still wins this game because up and down the roster, really on both sides of the ball, Georgia does clearly have the larger collection of top-flight talent. Malzahn's compliment may have been meant as kind of a low-key jab at Kirby, but the truth is it's the number one reason why Georgia probably wins this game on Saturday, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. Brandon, I know you're so much better at these things than me, but, as far as the political currents go between the headlines, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Gus Malzahn actually say something that was accurate?
Right.
Georgia is the most talented team in the SEC. And that's the part about that story that got me tickled, to use some of my old Southern heritage saying right there. But, I mean, this game, Brandon, traditionally is won in 2020 on the field. It's won in 2017, 2018, and 2019. I think, to me, all the areas where Auburn was deadly last year and really a really tough opponent to overcome. Remember, Georgia beat them, but they went on to beat Alabama last season as well. But Marlon Davidson, Derek Brown, well, those guys are gone. And Georgia this year on its front has their own versions of the Marlon Davidsons and the Derek Brown. Now, I don't think Georgia has a Derek Brown top 15 type pick on the line, but you look at Georgia's front, I think Devontae White will be drafted. I think Jordan Davis might even be a first, second round pick. You look at Jermaine Johnson, you look at Azeez Ojulari, you look at Monty Rice, Julian Rock. There's a lot of guys on Georgia's front that I think pays the difference in this game, because I know all the focus is on the quarterback position, but to me, what Georgia's defense has to do is it has to be dominant against Auburn, where whatever hiccups or whatever rotation cycle happens on the offensive side of the ball under center or with Georgia's work-in-progress offensive line. I mean, Georgia's work-in-progress offensive line is still choosing from the nation's number 1 guard, the nation's number 2 guard, the nation's number 1 center, the nation's number 1 guard, the nation's number 3 offensive tackle, the nation's number 4 offensive tackle. Auburn doesn't have any of those dudes that they're choosing from. Now, they got good players, but that's like top 10, top 15 in the country type players, whereas Georgia has annually added over the last 4 years the average 1.7 rated recruiting class in the country. There's no really comparison between those two schools when it comes to that.
So let me do a couple quick things on this before we change the subject. One of the things that I said a little earlier this week is, if I'm an Auburn fan, I hear Gus Malzahn, and this is for the most part sort of typical coach. I mean, Kirby is right about this. There's a little coach speak involved in like touting and talking up your opponent. But if I'm an Auburn fan, I'm hearing Kirby say that, as I said before, when I was a kid, it was Georgia versus Auburn for all the top players, and as of late, Auburn's having to be a lot more. Their recruiting priorities have seemingly been forcibly changed by just how much Kirby's hoarding a lot of the top talent here in the Southeast. If I'm an Auburn fan right now, that's one of the things I'm questioning with Gus Malzahn is, hey, why is it that Auburn's essentially standing down while Georgia goes and collects a lot of this elite talent, not just guys like George Pickens, who was a flip from Auburn on signing day, but other Peach State battles that used to be kind of the domain of Auburn because geographically it's so close. If I'm an Auburn fan, I'm asking, how is it that my program allowed Georgia to collect so much talent here over the course of the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's crazy with Auburn how they used to do. I mean, I'm just going to say this matter-of-factly. When you look at a player's offer sheet and you see names like Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, those are the ones that really resonate anymore, whereas, Auburn's a little tier below that. You remember, everybody starts searching and thinking about, what's the last time. I don't think Tank Bigsby can be classified as a head-to-head straight-up win against Georgia in the last cycle. I know maybe different people, different allegiances might think elsewhere, but the last time, I think 2016 is a pretty good time stamp to go back to, Brandon. Derek Brown chose Auburn. Remember Kyle Davis, for everybody that wants to go back a little bit at time warp there? Kyle Davis, he chose Auburn. Even though back then Kyle Davis still wasn't the top-rated receiver on Georgia's board, but yet he was the number 1 receiver in the country for a while. I think, thankfully, he's playing in the Canadian Football League right now. Never thought we'd have a Kyle Davis update 2020 on your fine program here, but that's the ones where you sit there and you go, okay, Auburn came in and stole somebody from Georgia that Georgia really wanted. And I think that's where Auburn kind of needs to go. I mean, you look at their All-American best players they brought in lately. Hank Bigsby's definitely one of those guys, a true All-American, top 5, top 6 running back. Bo Nix is the same way. Owen Papo, I think that's a guy when you start tracing back. That's a guy that Georgia still would have loved to have on the roster, but instead of getting Owen Papo, Georgia got Nakobe Dean, which is, I think, quite a fine gift or crowning jewel of any recruiting class, regardless. I think that's the major thing. I still think SEC football, Brandon. I keep looking at this game, and I think quarterbacks, and I think running backs and wide receivers. I think all that's kind of kind of eye candy a little bit, that kind of distracts from the main purpose, and that's what guys have up front and what these two programs have up front between Georgia and Auburn. And I think Georgia definitely has a clear edge on both lines of scrimmage now. They got to perform a little bit better. They got to play a little bit better. But I think at some point, maybe, what do they always say in football, Brandon? The biggest gains are between the first game and the second game.
Sure.
I don't know if we can have this same timetable in this pandemic setting where, maybe not the same amount of, spring practices and an actual formal game. Maybe this year the biggest jump might come from game 2 to game 3 because that will feel like more people have gotten their legs under them a little bit.
So let me do one more thing kind of on this topic because, as you mentioned, when you look at Owen Popo, I don't want to overstate this, but it seems like Auburn just recruited him fully as a linebacker, whereas I think if you want to go back in the time we were talking about Popo, I think that Georgia may have seen him in a little bit of a similar way in which they maybe saw Otis Reese at one point in time as a linebacker. They'd look to convert to safety, maybe at the next level. I would say that Popo thus far has been a better player than maybe Georgia's evaluation of Popo might have been. I don't want to overstate that, but it seems true to me. A guy like Big Cat Bryant, it seems like Georgia pulled out all the stops to get him. He just chose to go to Auburn. I remember that being, pretty contested and probably a little bit contentious down there. Contentious, I guess the word. Contentious down there in Cordele when that all went down. For these Georgians on the Auburn roster who have backstory with Georgia, either contested recruitment that Auburn happened to win, or maybe Auburn getting a chance to prioritize in a way that Georgia couldn't because of the wide net that Georgia's casting. How much of a wrinkle in the storyline do you think that is for a game like this?
Papo's a good. He's one of those guys that I thought Georgia was trying to use him in a lot of places. Auburn does. While we're on the subject of recruiting, they do have one of the best recruiters in the entire Southeast. It's almost to the point. With Travis Williams, he's very genuine. He's very matter-of-fact about his business. We even have some of our fine members on the DawgNation forum wondering and pontificating if Georgia ever has an opening, if they could bring a guy like Travis Williams onto the staff to keep the ball rolling in terms of how well they recruit. And that's like those specific relationships there are kind of the reason why Auburn has still been able to get a chance to get some of this top talent there. I mean, you think about the 5 stars on the field on Saturday. Bo Nix was a 5-star. Owen Papo was a 5-star. Tank Bigsby wasn't a 5-star. You got to remember Zacchaeus Walker as well. That's a defensive lineman that would have been a good piece there for Georgia, and the head-to-head there was just kind of won by Auburn. So Auburn still, I want to back up a little bit. Auburn, when you look at it as a whole, they've won a lot of their battles. Not a lot of their battles, but they've won some battles with the University of Georgia, as well it should be. They have a lot to offer in terms of playing time and other things. I think the thing there, everybody quickly goes to Pickens. And can you imagine, Brandon, what Auburn would look like with a fear factor if Pickens and Seth Williams were on the field coming into Athens on Saturday? I mean, that's one area I keep coming back to. Pickens was committed to Auburn for 566 days before he flipped on National Signing Day. I still love that story. I heard people that I know that were on the scene. They were telling me he was talking to 3 different coaches at the time, Auburn, Tennessee, and Georgia. Didn't really know. I think the Hoover High athletic director even told reporters that he really has no idea what he's going to do yet. That was like 10, 15, 20 minutes before the announcement. He hasn't said what he's going to do yet. And the only comparison I would think of would be, remember how Nolan Smith stayed with Georgia for almost 2.5 years? I think his number was like 620, Brandon. How he went the longest to me in terms of recent memory of a guy sticking, especially the number 1 player in the country, a 5-star who is still very wanted by schools by Alabama, Ohio State, Florida, Clemson, and things like that. I mean, all those schools really wanted Nolan, and he stayed committed to Georgia. That was certainly a dagger for this football game for the next couple of years when you got Pickens, which was not a strength for Georgia, and Pickens coming over to a position that was not a strength for Georgia, and now giving Georgia a whole lot of oomph there at that position where Georgia's collection of receivers. When's the last time we went into this game, Brendan, where Georgia's collection of talent at wide receiver was kind of clearly a notch above Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that all of this makes the game more interesting for the Auburn guys that chose, or I should say for the Georgians that chose Auburn. I don't have a bad word to say about them, but I do think UGA's got an obligation to win this game as a way of sending a warning to future recruits. Be careful going to Auburn because you're not going to be beating Georgia if you do. Same thing for Pickens flipping from Auburn to Georgia. Georgia's got an obligation to use him in a big way in a day like this to sort of send that message of, yes, young man, you really did make the right choice. I love recruiting for this reason because not only is the lifeblood for how you win games, but it also makes the games that are played a little more interesting because of the past storylines that get some resolution, the future storylines. We're going to get to the 2021 class here in a minute with a big head-to-head battle between Georgia and Auburn, but it makes these future storylines richer as well, that all of this just becomes either a validation of the choice that was made or maybe a warning to future guys, choose to go elsewhere other than Georgia at your own risk.
Yeah, and I think playing time's a big thing there. We referenced Jones a minute ago, and that's because Broderick, I think, with 4 new starters, he would have had a really, really good shot to come in and compete and get some time at Auburn. Whereas if you read the freshman report from DawgNation last week, he wasn't even on the plane to go out to Arkansas, and that all makes a lot of sense. You got Xavier Truss, an All-American. You got Warren McClendon, another one of those guys that went to the opening. You've got Jamari Salyer, who was an All-American and a 5-star as well. Georgia at the tackle position just had a couple of guys and even a more experienced developed player like Owen Condon, who'd been in Athens for 2 years already. And to me, it kind of boils down to this, because I think who has the better players, and I think that's funny how much is being made about Gus Malzahn saying Auburn has better players. Kind of like somebody on your show saying, you know what, I think Brandon likes the dog. I really do. It's just kind of obvious, but let me give a good reference point here to succinctly share what I'm thinking about. Brandon, remember the days when Georgia was 8th, 9th, 10th in recruiting nationally every year, and that sure sounded pretty good, we're recruiting among the top 10s, but right. When you're 3rd or 4th in the SEC, that means you're not getting to your goals. You're getting to 10-2, you're getting to 9-3, because the teams you lose to every cycle are the ones that are more talented to you. And I think that's where Auburn is at. Auburn is that school that, can look at it, and I think the last 3 or 4 years it goes, 12, 11, 9, 10. That's where Auburn's hanging, but the problem is they're always 3rd or 4th in the SEC behind schools like Georgia and Alabama and LSU. And when 2 of those are your intra-division rivals and the other one is the one you would have to meet in Atlanta in the SEC championship game, it makes it very hard to accomplish your ultimate goals when the teams you're going up against have more talent on the field.
I want to talk about 5-star linebacker Smile Mondon in a moment. That's a big head-to-head battle between both Georgia and Auburn. We'll do that on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel. And by the way, speaking of AAA, many of you are aware of their legendary roadside assistance. It's one of the things that you love about AAA. It gives you peace of mind. But what you might not be as aware of, and you should be, is that AAA can also save you big on your auto insurance. When you switch and save with AAA, you can save on average of $529. Big savings there. It's AAA.com/auto insurance. AAA.com/auto insurance. You can find more information about that. All right, Jeff, when it comes to the 2021 class, I don't know there's any more significant head-to-head battle right now between Georgia and Auburn than when it comes to 5-star linebacker Smile Mondon. Admittedly, I don't know much about this recruitment whatsoever because Mondon's pretty close to the vest. But what I do think I know, I certainly am not jumping up and down saying this is a slam dunk that Georgia's going to win. If anything, I guess I view Auburn as a point spread favorite for Mondon's recruitment at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong to feel that way, but that just seems to be what the internet seems to be saying to me. What do you make of the situation with Mondon right now? And I understand we may have a little bit of an update coming up on that at DawgNation.com here very soon as well.
Yeah, Brandon, I think Smile Mondon is a good guy to talk to, and I don't think it's for. I know what you're doing with great formatting and programming. Georgia and Auburn's playing. It looks like it would probably going to come down to Georgia and Auburn for Smile Mondon. He's in the state of Georgia. That's what Auburn needs to do to challenge Georgia. They need to pull more Smile Mondon out of the state, make this a real rivalry, and really offset a lot of Georgia's momentum in the rivalry. And all that sounds really good. But the reality here is, number one, I don't think Smile Mondon even knows where he's going to go. He's told me that he'll he'll have periods where he thinks it's this school, and it sits with him for about a week or two, and then he changes his mind, and then it's this school. He thought he was going to be ready to make his decision in June, but he wasn't. He saw no need to press it or force the issue. But Munden is a guy that, first of all, 6'3", 215, can run kickoffs back for Paulding County if he had to. He runs the jet sweeps a lot. He's an All-American Bowl pick. He's the number one recruit in the entire state of Georgia, even rated higher than Amarius Mims, at least on the pure, isolated 24/7 sports rating. But, it's funny. You talk to him, and it's like, hold up. You can't take your visits. How hard is this going to be? Is it really tough? You don't know yet. He's like, no, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. He's like, I don't need to go to all these schools. I've been to all these schools at least 2 times. He's been to games at Georgia. He's been to games at Auburn. He's not feeling like he is blindfolded or he will have to make the toughest decision of his life without data. He's not feeling that way at all. It doesn't really sound like he's sweating what he's going to do and how tough it's going to be and how much it's going to alter his life. He just knows that, he'll probably do some more virtual visits and he'll talk to the coaches every day. And sooner or later, he'll just arrive at the decision, and he's got plenty of time to do so. He told me he's maybe a month to 2 months away, maybe November, December sounds about right. He does think he will make his decision, and he will sign during the early period because he wants to go early. He doesn't sound like a guy that's going to wait for the theatrics or trappings of the game in order to make his decision. But it's almost like a guy that he knows he's got something big coming up, and maybe this is a high schooler's way of thinking, okay, I'm going to take the ACT in 2.5 months. I know I'm going to have to maybe do a prep course, or maybe I'm going to have to get with a counselor or maybe get some tutoring. But I got time. He looks at it like he has all the time in the world to make this decision.
I think that's really interesting. So let me kind of see if I can sum this up a little bit. The Munden recruitment is really quiet, I would say. Is it quiet because he does, and I think you've already answered this, but I just want to kind of put this into a summary here. Is it quiet because he does know where he's going and just doesn't want to say, or he doesn't yet know where he's going and so therefore there's nothing to talk about?
I think that's more of that. When he says, I don't know, Small's a guy that, he wants to be in communication. He's very engaging, and he just basically says, like I think bubble is a different way I want to use this. I'm not talking about protections against a pandemic or coronavirus. It's like, it's just not that huge of a deal to him where, these fans and these fan bases, he's not really active on social media. He's not interacting and retweeting with fans, maybe in the same manner as that Amarius Mims does daily with lots of fan bases. He's got LSU. LSU is the one school that he hasn't ever visited before, but he's visited Florida a couple times. He's visited Georgia a couple times. He's visited Tennessee a couple times. He's visited Georgia a couple times, and he feels like that gives him enough of everything he needs to know. He thinks all the degrees are about the same. I think the thing that's interesting about Shmuel Munden is I'm gonna kind of hit the rewind button back to days of VHS tapes or something like that, or maybe at least Vine videos that everybody used to have as a social media platform for sharing football players and their highlights. But Shmuel, he comes from. He is the first All-American player ever to come out of Paulding County High School. First one with a Georgia offer. Those big boy schools that offered him, but he's a guy that was never going to. This is something that stands out. He was never going to do an opening. He was never going to do an Under Armour All-American. He was never going to go to all those prospect camps where we can check his oil and kind of see who the best of the best is. He was never really going to do that. If he did anything, he would go to a team camp. He would just let his film speak on its own, and there wasn't a lot of posturing. There wasn't a lot of, he's so athletic, Brandon. He's that sideline to sideline linebacker that athletically he looks a lot and would function on a football field a lot like a Roquan Smith was. I don't think that's a lazy comparison, but the difference is he's maybe not as refined or as raw, where he's as instinctive a linebacker as a Nakobe Dean is. There's a few like a little head scratchers here with Munden's recruitment. Everybody's basically recruiting him the same. All 5 of those schools: Auburn, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, LSU. Mind you, coaches that really know what they're doing. They're recruiting him as an inside linebacker, a guy that you need to keep clean so he can come downhill and make plays. but yet by the recruiting services, he's rated as an outside linebacker because of his speed and also because of his length. He's just such an interesting athlete, and he's rated that high, and because of the coronavirus, he was always going to stay that high, especially because he wasn't going to go to camp. It's almost like a guy that's got, the race, or, we're playing skins or we're playing stakes and we're playing on the golf course, and I got a 4-shot lead, and I see no need to pull the driver off the tee. I can just keep hitting the 3-wood because he'd already made it in terms of a recruiting stance, in terms of recruiting laurels. He'd already rated as a 5-star, rated as a number 1 prospect in the country, and there was really no need for him, even if we had camp, for him to go out to these prospect camps and these evaluation showcases to do anything to offset that or to maybe diminish that rating.
Really quick before I let you go, Pierce Sperling commits this week, 2023 tight end. I love his affection for Georgia. I love the fact that he thinks this new Todd Monken offense is going to be fun to be a part of, assuming Monken's still here 2 years from now. I like all that from Sperling. What do you think Georgia fans should like about the latest UGA commit for a couple cycles from now?
You think maybe that might be the Buster Faulkner offense, maybe, or something like that?
Who knows? It could very well be.
This is a good dude, and he comes from a good family. I would project here and say I don't see Pierce Sperling being a guy that goes to a lot of. I don't think he'll take a visit, Brandon. I don't think when visits come back, he's committed to Georgia for a reason. He's got multiple Bulldogs in his family, multiple ties to the program. Trained by Terrence Edwards. He's got definitely the goat horns thumbs up from Terrence Edwards about what he can be. Just going to be a different type receiver, 6'6", about 220. It's that flex in that Todd Hartley's doing a bang-up job in bringing in different type of athletes for his schemes and the guys that will play that position at Georgia. Pierce is a guy that is, he told us back in the summer, and I tried to write this as vanilla as I could, but man, it certainly sounded like it was imminent for him to choose Georgia, and this process wasn't going to take a long time of marination for him to become a Bulldog. There's that high-profile, low-key, at the same time, group threat of 2023 commits where it certainly seems like everybody is going to come to Georgia in that 2023 class. It might be the biggest and best recruiting class of all time at Georgia, much less the Kirby Smart era, which is kind of saying the same thing there. Pierce Sperling is a dedicated dog who's going to do a lot to bolster the ranks of the 2023 class. And nation's number 2 tight end, Brandon, and still got a long ways to go. Very productive. Get yourself open tight end. And here's something, a little nugget about Pierce. Pierce is going to be a guy that a lot of those things you like about George Pickens, that playing with reckless abandon, playing with a little bit of edge, playing with a little bit of chip, getting into those back and forth things there with the DB. Pierce Sperling's got a side of that too, where he'll get into that red a little bit on game days, and I think he'll find his best football when he does that. When somebody pokes the Bulldog instead of saying pokes the bear a little bit. Pierce Sperling III. I know it sounds like he's got a sweater vest on Saturdays, and his family has a lot of properties and country club memberships, but on that field, that guy is a violent, is a competitive dude, hot-tempered football player.
Great to hear. Jeff, thanks for being here on the road, assisted by AAA. Enjoy the weekend. I know you're on the road tonight as well. Enjoy that opportunity to watch some football, and we'll look forward to talking to you here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and on the road, assisted by AAA again very soon.
Brandon, going to be a great weekend for everybody. Football at its finest this weekend. Hope everybody enjoys it. Thanks for having me on.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Love Jeff Sintel on a Friday, and as he said, really heading for a really fun football weekend all across the board, and nothing pairs better with that than our friends at Classic City Lager. Creature Comforts is an Athens original. It's part of the great Athens landscape, but the good news is you don't have to be in Athens to enjoy the Athens original that is Classic City Lager. Whichever retailer you go to, it's available in those 6 and 12-pack cans. It's an easy drinking beer, but it tastes great. It's got crisp flavor, but it goes down nice and smooth as well. So make sure you check out Classic City Lager wherever you do your shopping. It's year-round, 6 and 12-pack cans, and it goes great on what is, I am told, a beautiful fall weekend coming up. Great weather. I think it's 68 degrees kickoff tomorrow between Georgia and Auburn. It doesn't get any better than that. And, of course, many of you doing some home gating this year. Classic City Lager goes great with that. All right, I want to try to sum up the SEC weekend for me in a couple of storylines where I think that you look at, in a year like this where everybody's playing SEC competition, there's just a lot of news cycles that are going to spin really, really fast. And there are 3 coaches, I think, on Saturday who really need something good to happen for them. Otherwise, they're going to get a lot of attention going into week 3 in a way that's just going to be tough to deal with. The first for me is Jimbo Fisher. Now, I don't think the Texas A&M is probably capable of beating Alabama on the road. That's probably asking a little too much. But after a week in which A&M did not play very well, not a very impressive final score against Vanderbilt, people don't like Jimbo anyway for kind of whatever reason. Jimbo Fisher is just one of those guys that generates seemingly a good deal of skepticism. He's got to find a way to see his team play better at Alabama, leaning on what I think is actually a better Mike Elko defense than some people think, making up for the losses they've had. They've had some, opt-outs, things like that. Kellen Mond does need to play better because this is supposed to be an experienced quarterback working with Jimbo Fisher, a quarterback-minded head coach. This is a big week for Jimbo Fisher. Otherwise, the knives are going to be out by his critics going into next week. The other guy who I'll say that about is Ed Orgeron at LSU. Now, LSU Vanderbilt is not a big game, but LSU lost last week, and its first game as defending national champion. And I continue to believe that story was more about what LSU's incapable of doing right now than it is necessarily what Mississippi State was capable of doing, even though people seem to have a good time with the Mike Leach storyline. Last year, LSU didn't play particularly well against Vanderbilt. They scored a ton of points, but they also gave up a ton. And as I just said, Vanderbilt kind of kept it closer against Texas A&M last Saturday than most people probably thought they would. Certainly the experts expected that game to go. This is a fairly big game for LSU to kind of show that it is capable of riding the ship and at least living to fight another day as one of the top, sort of upper half SEC teams, as opposed to what might end up being kind of in that bottom half of the SEC. This is a pretty big deal for LSU on Saturday. And then finally there's this in terms of the coaches who kind of find their back against the wall a little bit. And this is not a coach we talk about very much, but as I've told you before, the media loves this guy. Mark Stoops is a media darling. He is treated almost exactly the same way that Dan Mullen was once treated when Mullen was at Mississippi State. This is the coach that supposedly does more with less, and that when you want to sound smart, you say, listen, Mark Stoops, boy, he gets it done in the SEC. Well, he didn't get it done last week against Auburn, and, revisionist history, it's important to point out, there were a lot of people going into that game that thought Kentucky had a real chance to win it. Auburn not only wins but covers the spread, so it was not a good day for Kentucky a week ago. They face Ole Miss on Saturday. Now, the math nerds will tell you Rebels have a chance in this game, even though Kentucky's been, around a touchdown favorite or so all week long. The math guys will tell you that Ole Miss has a real shot here. Kentucky cannot lose to Ole Miss because wins are hard to come by in the SEC this year. This is supposed to be first-year coach Lane Kiffin. Not a lot of, you have some pretty good skill players at Ole Miss. Ely, the running back, is really good. The couple quarterbacks there, I think both of those are particularly effective. But Kentucky's supposed to have the edges on both lines of scrimmage. I think if you're Kentucky, you've got to win on Saturday. I think that's a really big deal. And then just to kind of shift gears here on the opposite end of the spectrum just for a moment, I think there are 3 programs on Saturday that could really take a big next step forward. And if they do so, you'd have to at least give them a little bit of credit. Let me kind of run through these kind of quickly before my SEC through music runs out. You may not realize this, but Florida on Saturday against South Carolina, this is the second biggest point spread they've had in SEC play under Dan Mullen. Earlier in the week, they were 18.5-point favorites. I haven't shopped the line too much recently, but they are big favorites, knocking on the door, being a 20-point favorite against South Carolina. If Florida wins that comfortably, then I think you have to say that Florida is moving into sort of that next phase. They've been good against lesser competition now for a while, but to truly handle their business a week after putting up some big, production against Ole Miss, for those of you that are kind of, grossed out by the Florida hype, you'll probably get a little more of that coming up on Saturday. I actually thought South Carolina played better than maybe some people maybe realized against Tennessee a week ago. Speaking of Tennessee, they're another perfect example of this. To me, this is a very interesting storyline on Saturday, and you may not have noticed it. So Tennessee's playing Missouri, and they are a double-digit favorite in that game. In the same game a year ago, Tennessee was just a 2.5-point favorite and only won by 4 points. That game was in Columbia. This game's in Knoxville, so you have a big difference in terms of venue. But what the experts, the point spread folks, are telling you here is is they think that Tennessee is dramatically better year over year on the basis of the fact that Tennessee is now expected to win easily against Missouri in a game last year in which they were expected to only eke by, and really that's all they did. Is this too much too soon for Tennessee? Are they really capable of getting an easy win against a program like Missouri in just the second game of the Eli Drinkwitz era? There'll be a stabilization of the Vols program if that does indeed take place. That's a game worth watching on Saturday. And then, of course, it's the situation with Mississippi State. They're a big favorite at home now against Arkansas after beating LSU last week. Are we really ready to say that Mississippi State is capable of easily beating anyone? I have my skepticism about that a little bit here, but certainly there's a lot of chatter out there right now about the Bulldogs getting a chance to be in Starkville, play as a big favorite in SEC play after pulling the upset against LSU a week ago. That's one where if it turns out to be easy for the Bulldogs again on Saturday, then even more momentum will go around the Mississippi State storyline. Obviously, that's a future opponent for Georgia later on this season. We'll make that your SEC through. And, of course, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, when you think about those games, many of you want to get your action down on those games. Great way to do that's with my friends at MyBookie. When you use the promo code DawgNation, you can get a big first deposit bonus. You can get up to $1,000, your first deposit doubled. All that available to you with my friends at MyBookie. Simply find them online. Just type MyBookie in your browser. Use the promo code DawgNation. After that, you play, you win, you get paid. It's winning season at MyBookie, but make sure you use the promo code DawgNation. Okay, so as a way of kind of wrapping up our week here, I want to look back at yesterday just for a moment. So we were talking to Terrence Edwards about the 2002 Auburn game. Now, shame on me, I had forgotten that Terrence Edwards did not play in that game. It was one of the great, wins for me as kind of a young Georgia fan. I was in kind of a fun station of life back then where I had just a little bit of money, but like no responsibilities. I went to every game. I'd go to 9-10 games a year at least. And I was in Jordan Hare that day to see Georgia win the SECs for the first time and beat Auburn, which in and of itself is kind of a big deal. Back then it really mattered. Georgia's been on a long winning streak for, decade plus now, or at least, streak of dominance, if not an outright winning streak. But back then, beating Auburn was a really big deal. Georgia came back after being down in that game, and Terrence Edwards and I had kind of a fun time talking about that. If you missed that from yesterday's show, I'll invite you to go back and hear it. Plus, Terrence is just, a good guy to break down Georgia-Auburn with for this upcoming Saturday. But one of the things that Terrence also said when he joined us yesterday was, listen, when you're talking to John Stinchcomb, you need to let him tell you about what he stepped up and did after Georgia was losing in halftime and kind of started the game off on kind of an ugly note. Now, John's kind of a modest guy. He doesn't really like talking about himself very much. I'm not being funny. I'm being serious. But yesterday, when he was a part of our DawgNation happy hour, which is supported by Classic City Logger, and we do it every Thursday afternoon on the DawgNation video channels, I was able to coerce John into talking about that a little bit. It was a big deal for Georgia. It led to the winning of the SEC East for the first time in a hostile stadium against a bitter rival. And according to Terrence Edwards, a big speech from John Stinchcomb is what made that possible. This is what John had to say about that event from the past.
One of the things that we as a group always said was, don't let you be the guy to let your teammates down. And so I felt like there was an opportunity. I'm not a big rah-rah guy. I wasn't a guy who gave a lot of speeches. That just wasn't my leadership role. And I felt like as we're going into that halftime, we kind of needed a little bit of a wake-up call. So I got up in one of the lockers, and I'm, telling us to look at the man next to you, look him in the eyes, and know that right now the way you're playing is letting him down. That the way we're going out there, the way we've just played for the past 2 quarters, isn't good enough, and you owe that person next to you. You owe him more.
I think that's great. I think, first of all, it's fun to be able to look back. I'm a nostalgia guy. I'm a guy that thinks a lot about the past. It's fun to hear those stories about, what happened behind the scenes in the locker room for a game like that. John's good enough to tell that story to us, and it's also a great way to set us up for what's going to be a fun Saturday in Athens this week as well. It's just one of the things about rivalry games. You do have these stories that get passed down, whether it be the heartbreaking losses for Georgia and against Auburn. There have been a few of those, or the big time wins. all of that is prologue for a game like this coming up on Saturday. So please do me a favor, go back and listen to yesterday's show with Terrence Edwards to hear more about this, or check out the Dog Nation Happy Hour with Classic City Lager with John Stinchcomb, who kind of went into even more detail about what his message was, what Boss Bailey may have been doing at the same time, another great former Georgia linebacker. It's really good stuff. I've got my mind on George Pickens this week. I think it's a big game for him. This young man that is a big boost to Georgia when he flipped from Auburn to UGA. Getting him involved in the offense in a big way tomorrow, that to me is going to be a lot of fun. And even on a day we're thinking about Georgia-Auburn, still thinking about those lousy, stinking Gators. 1,434 days since Florida's beating Georgia. We'll see you Monday, Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Cannot wait for Georgia-Auburn on Saturday, and it is a great pleasure to talk to all of you about it today. So let's keep that going right now with our YouTube and Facebook comments. I did start on YouTube yesterday, so I'm going to go to Facebook first today, especially after the Facebook folks kind of yelled at me for saying, I think they said I stayed on YouTube a little too long yesterday. So I'll try to keep it nice and fair here. Zach Dempsey going with some poetry in the comment section. Pretty impressive. Chad Buchanan on one of those heartbreaking losses for Georgia in this series. Yeah, tough stuff. Barry Watkins says Auburn is a tough and talented team. Let me read the rest of Barry's comment here. He says Auburn is a tough and talented team. When the dust settles in the Saturday night lights, the dogs will know where they stand as a football team. Do we rise to the challenge? Do we make a statement to the rest of the SEC tonight? Do we zip up the mouths of the critics? I think that's all really good stuff from Barry, and it's one of the reasons we love SEC football. I shoot my mouth off, I say things, and then you've got games, whether you're a player who plays in the game, a coach who coaches the game, or just somebody who kind of evaluates what happens, we get proven right or wrong. This is a high-stakes deal here. This isn't, Ohio State in the Big Ten, who in its schedule is going to play like Illinois and then Rutgers and then Maryland and back-to-back weeks. Georgia just doesn't have one of those long stretches of playing nobodies. You have games like this where reputations are on the line. It's going to suck for Gus Malzahn if he loses again on Saturday. His fans are going to be very upset about that. Media is going to be asking some tough questions. And, likewise, for Kirby, who's built himself a little bit of a cushion with rivals like Florida and Auburn, who I legitimately don't think he likes very much. All of a sudden, if you lose, if you're Kirby, that cushion is diminished a little bit. All of a sudden, that edge you held over these other guys, all of a sudden you don't have quite as much of that anymore. And those recruiting battles you've enjoyed winning against those programs, they become a little harder to win once the other team can say, hey, why would you go to Georgia and sit the bench when you can come here and play right away? And by the way, we just beat Georgia this past year. There's a lot at stake in these kind of games. This is kind of a zero-sum deal where it's nothing but good for the team who wins it and nothing but bad for the team that loses. It's our R.S. Andrews cool down, by the way. Let me also give a shout-out to them. Remind you that if your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day, but you need to find them online at rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. All right, a few more Facebook comments here. Kevin Green says 35-13. Boy, that'd be something. Hugh Nash says that Auburn has an identity crisis. They don't know if they're Tigers or War Eagles or UGA's biggest rival, Bama's biggest rival. Yeah, there's some of that going on there. I think that's probably true. Kylan Susan Richter says, I've never been a Malzahn fan. He says, they say boo-hoo there. Yeah, there won't be too many Georgia fans shedding tears for Malzahn if he faces some heat after this game on Saturday. Jay Squilla says, over-under on UGA quarterbacks to play on Saturday. This is actually a really interesting question. He says 2.5. Over or under that? I would take a slight bet on that over. I think there's a chance that Georgia in some form or fashion plays 3 on Saturday. If I had to guess, Stetson Bennett is the one that plays the most, and this is just a guess. My assumption here is that somehow, some way, JT Daniels is not as healthy now as he will be. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised to find out that's not true, but somehow, some way, I'm assuming that Daniels isn't quite healthy enough yet to be a huge, full part of this offensive game plan as of yet. And I'm guessing that somehow, some way, that Kirby Smart still sees some of the value in Dwan Mathis that he saw, going into the Arkansas game, that Mathis still has some kind of role in this one on Saturday. But I think the lion's share of the game plan probably does belong to Stetson Bennett. And we'll see how he handles that situation now, knowing that there's been a week's worth of defense game planning against him, right? When you sneak into the game against Arkansas, even Sam Pittman, who knows Bennett, probably wasn't expecting to see very much of him. In Auburn's case, they've had every reason to believe that Bennett's going to play. Is there some sort of specific scouting they can do to now be more ready for Bennett? I guess we'll all watch out and find out on Saturday. But if the over-under is 2.5 quarterbacks playing, it's a great question. I'll take a slight bet on the over there with the assumption that Bennett is still the one that plays the most of the three. Robert Barnes says that Georgia doesn't really have an edge this year. We're going to have to earn it all the way like we did in 2017. The thing about 2017, though, was Georgia did have a huge edge. Almost everyone that had played that season. Most of the SEC East games weren't close at all. I would say that this schedule for Georgia a good bit tougher than the 2017 schedule was. Kevin Green says he thinks that Mathis starts. Listen, I think that Kirby still sees value in Dwan Mathis, and I would encourage Georgia fans to stay in Mathis' corner throughout all of this. Don Williams has lots of close score predictions. Yeah, Don, I will say that my own personal prediction was probably a good bit closer at the beginning of the week. I'm gaining some confidence in Georgia here right now, but it was certainly closer at the beginning of the week. Timothy Jones says he thinks Florida loses on Saturday. That'd be interesting. Noah Sheldon says 28-10 Dogs. So there you go. Brian Jones has it closer, though, 20-17. Let's see what else. Winston Relaford then says he believes that Malzahn coaches scared in a big game. That's one of the reasons why I think that Chad Morris's influence in this game on Saturday is going to be really interesting because, it's been the tug of war that's gone on. And I think that, if you really follow other SEC teams, many of you just don't have time to. You barely have enough time to consume all the Georgia content that's out there. You may not quite have. Hold on. There. Well, I'm having an art. Where's my YouTube? Hold on one second. I got to find the. What was I saying? There we go. Sorry. What was I saying? I forget what I was saying now. Let me get some YouTube comments. Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought for a second because I looked for my YouTube broadcast and couldn't find it. So I think if you think that Malzahn has coached scared in the past, I think there's probably some belief to back that up. It's one of the reasons why I think that Chad Morris's presence this year is going to be so significant. And if you follow other SEC media closely, I think one of the things you're going to see start to be a bigger storyline around Auburn is the fact that former Auburn offensive coordinator Rhett Lashley is now at Miami and is doing great things with that Hurricanes offense. Now, will they keep it up for all season long? Who really knows about that? But Lashley's a guy that once left Auburn to go to UConn, which is a huge step down in program. But the general assumption was that he just didn't feel like he was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but certainly he didn't feel like he got to be the full-fledged offensive coordinator at a place like Auburn, and then Chip Lindsey came in, kind of dealt with some of the same kind of stuff. Well, now you've got Chad Morris, who's been an SEC head coach, was a big-time offensive coordinator at Clemson, one of the first offensive coordinators to make more than $1 million. This is a guy that's got some credentials, and on a day like Saturday, does Malzahn allow himself to be the CEO-style head coach, and does he allow Morris to control the Auburn offense? If you're an Auburn fan, that's a big, big storyline going into this game on Saturday. SEC Dog says I was having a Dan Mullet moment. Yeah, I kind of I forgot what I was talking about because I wanted to try to find you guys on the YouTube side of things here for a moment. DogFan3 on the subject of Dwan Mathis playing and Georgia winning. I think that, listen, at a certain point, I think it's the combination of, let's put Daniels aside for a moment because we don't know what Georgia's going to get from him, but I think it's the combination of what Mathis brings to the table and what Bennett brings to the table that could potentially provide just enough offense for Georgia. I don't think Georgia's lighting the world on fire with either of its quarterbacks or any of its quarterbacks coming up on Saturday. I just don't. And, I do think it's important not to put too much on Stetson Bennett's shoulders here and say, even though I was thrilled with the way that he played last Saturday and really happy that he's getting his moment at Georgia, I'm very happy for him for that. This notion of, Well, you saw all you needed to see from Stetson Bennett last week. That proves you he's the guy that needs to be the quarterback for Georgia on Saturday. That's making a lot out of a pretty small sample size. For a Georgia offense that's going to have to try to find a way to get some yards however it can, the things that Mathis does well, at some point in time on Saturday, you may be glad to have those things. Green Soldier says 3 quarterbacks is way too much. Can't even imagine how chaotic and damaging that could be to an already hurting offense. He says you pick 2, and that's all you can do. 3 means you're so far behind that you're guessing. I understand where you're coming from on that, Green Soldier. I think that's fair. I do think there is a sense in which Georgia is still guessing with its quarterback situation a little bit. And I do think that when Daniels is truly fully healthy, then you won't see 3 playing anymore. I don't think that you will. But until that happens, I think the possibility of 3 guys getting into the game is likely. That is a lot to play, and you certainly can't rotate 3. It'd be specific situations for all 3. As for instance, you remember the old coach Howard Schnellenberger, who used to always give his backup quarterback the first series of the second quarter. If Daniels is somewhat healthy but not truly healthy, then Georgia could go into the game knowing that it's going to give Daniels like 1 series at this specific time. I'm just making all of this up, of course, but 1 series this specific time, and that's not disrupting the flow of too much because everybody knows it's going to happen at this specific moment. No one's surprised by it. In other words, a quarterback doesn't feel like he's being jerked out of the game. This was planned to begin with. And then, Dwan Mathis, maybe it's some specific plays that you expect to run with him. As much as I don't like, quarterbacks being used as gadget guys only, I think that gets a little bit, problematic after a while. It could be that a gimmick like that for Georgia this week is kind of what you have to do. And then Stetson Bennett kind of fills in the gaps in the other places. So it's not ideal to me either, but it may be what Georgia has to do. However, the one thing I do truly believe, if Daniels is healthier than I think he is, then the chances of Georgia playing 3 quarterbacks, I think, goes down. And as Daniels gets healthier over the course of the year, then the number of quarterbacks that Georgia would potentially look to use in a game would probably also go down as well. CB says, what are the Dogs wearing on Saturday? My assumption is it's the red with the silver. I do think that Georgia will probably announce it if it wears the black jerseys. The one thing I thought what is good about this year is I'd love to see the black jerseys kind of destigmatized a little bit. In other words, Georgia wearing them, but it's not a blackout. To me, this is a great year to wear black jerseys a pretty good bit because there's not going to be as many fans in the stands. It's not a blackout. There's nothing wrong with wearing black jerseys, but when it turns into a blackout, sometimes that becomes, I think, the kind of distraction that Kirby Smart wants to avoid. Now, if you wear them against Auburn, it's going to be the immediate invitation to remember back in 2007 when Georgia won them the first time. Maybe Kirby Smart wants to avoid that, even though otherwise a night game on a night when it's not expected to be incredibly hot, the black jerseys would probably make a lot of sense. But Smart probably wants to avoid them for the reason that I just mentioned. But I hope they wear them more than once this year, even though they've only got 4 home games. I hope they wear them more than once this year because I just think it helps to destigmatize them and allows them in the future to just be a fashion choice that Georgia wants to make more so than a motivational ploy. As a cool look to make the game fun, I love the black jerseys. As a, extra source of motivation, for a team that needs a pick-me-up, I think most of us are kind of against that. And so this year, because of the limited number of fans and just the fact that there's no chance for a blackout, I think that's a chance to wear the black jerseys even more. GB2 touting for Kenny McIntosh to get his chance on Saturday. We shall see. We shall see. I'm not ready to move off James Cook yet, but it is a big game for him. It is a big game for him coming up on Saturday. Graham Nicholson on the idea of the red jerseys. Yeah, if I'm guessing, I think it's going to be red with the silver. Jeff Jones on the subject of the Georgia offensive line. We talked about that a lot this week. They do have to be better. And, I think how the offensive game plan works will make it easier on the Georgia offensive line. This is not a line this year in my mind that's designed to just sort of step there and just kind of maul people over. This isn't 335 pounds at offensive tackle anymore, the way that it would have been last year. So it's going to take the full total of the Georgia offensive game plan to get the best out of the Georgia offensive line. Keith Fold says black jerseys on senior day. I wouldn't mind that. Perry Watkins says, how about black jerseys with red pants? Yeah, you know that's coming. Just as soon as they kind of loosen the reins on these uniforms a little bit, the multiple combinations will start coming out here in a big way, and a lot of y'all will like that, and I guess if y'all are happy with it, I'm fine with it too. Once you start wearing a different combination every week, you have definitely gotten out of my personal comfort zone, but as much as it pains me to admit, Georgia football doesn't exist just to please me. Miriam Martin Corbin says, the offense just needs to play well at every position, and Miriam is right about that. Daniel Aldridge says, I'm ready for the weekend. You better believe that, Daniel. You better believe that. Hugh Nash says he's ready to move off of Cook. You may regret that, Hugh. Listen, I'm telling you, one of the things that I try to do is change my mind slowly. Now, I may have to change my mind eventually, but I was high on Cook coming into the season. I'm not gonna change my mind on the basis of just 1 week. Not to say that I won't eventually change my mind, but I'm not ready to do that yet. I'm gonna move off him slowly. That's still a pretty talented young man that had some nice moments, I was told, during the scrimmage that some boosters got a chance to see. So I'm not quite ready to move off James Cook just yet. By the way, Marshall Fleming reminding us that we will still get a chance to see the light show on Saturday. So, yeah, that's going to be kind of fun. Not as many seats filled, but the light's still cranked up in a big way. All right. Let's see. Anything else we got to do? Jason Crosby says, I want to see the big dogs eat. So give the big ugly some love and run the ball after last week's performance. Yeah, I mean, the rushing game for Georgia is obviously a huge, huge part of how this game gets decided on Saturday. There's no doubt about that. Thanks to all of you for being with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And as you head towards the weekend, a great way to stay up to date on everything that's going on in your world is with the AJC. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. They do a great job getting you up to date with all of that, including some really cool stuff, whether it be the Braves getting ready for the postseason. Falcons face a game on Monday night. Braves won their first playoff series since 2001. Now I'll use series in quotation marks. This is a little bit different kind of playoff series, but we'll still give them some credit for that. Also, one of the great Atlanta restaurants. They have a cool recipe in the AJC for one of their great famous menu items. Some of the kind of fun stuff that you get in the AJC all the time. Also, lots of things to do around the metro Atlanta area this weekend. The AJC is always great when it comes to weekend preview stuff as well. So get all of your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. And don't forget, for all of your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, make sure you check out my friends at RS Andrews. We're coming up on a colder weather time of year. That means many of you want to get those furnaces tuned up, have that peace of mind that your heating system is ready to go for the winter that's on its way. So get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at RS Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Great stuff. Thanks for being with us here today. I'll look forward to seeing you back here on Monday. Enjoy the game. If you're in Athens, stop by and see us at the UGA bookstore. I'll be up there on the second floor there. Now, Terrence Edwards will be with us through video, but I'll be up there on the second floor after the game and out and about a little bit before the game there as well. So if you're there tomorrow, make sure you say hello to me, and I'll give you a socially distant hello myself. So good to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Y'all enjoy the weekend. We'll talk to you again on Monday, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.